We're going to talk now to a member of the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on modelling, SPIM for short, and that they advise the government on the handling of this pandemic. And a very warm welcome, please, to Dr. Michael Tildesley. Morning, Michael.
Morning.
Tiers, lockdowns. We've been going through tiers, lockdowns, fire breaks, circuit breakers now, off and on for 8 to 9 months. And we look around us, we see cases soaring, death rates soaring, people in panic, everything closed, hospitals at the breaking point. And we conclude after 9 months of all these measures, they don't appear to have worked, and yet we get more of them. What is the point of carrying on with a policy that has left us in the mess that we're in right now?
Yeah, so it's a really good question, Kevin. I mean, the problem is, in a sense, they don't work. You're right, because as soon as you pull the plug on these lockdowns, cases start to go up again. But the difficulty is, of course, if we don't have these severe measures, then what we end up with is hospitals becoming overwhelmed very rapidly, the number of deaths going up. Ultimately, what you want to do is get to the stage that you get herd immunity. Now, these were two words that were deemed to be very dirty words back in March when they were used.
Because Dominic Cummings used them.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think ultimately, of course, this is what we try to achieve with any kind of vaccination campaign. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get herd immunity. Now, the problem is, of course, we didn't have a vaccine, and we had a virus that was spreading rapidly. We had cases in hospitals going up. And really, the only alternative in the absence of a vaccine is some kind of measures to restrict the spread of the virus. The problem we have now, of course, is we've been having these sorts of lockdown measures for 9 months plus now, and it seems like adherence to those measures is a little bit on the wane. They're not working as effectively as they used to, and people are understandably getting quite tired. So I think we have a really difficult couple of months ahead of us where we want to try and have severe restrictions to prevent hospitals being overwhelmed. There's a vaccine on the horizon, but we're not quite there yet. So I do anticipate a difficult couple of months to come.
Do you feel when the government and the sage scientists start blaming rule breakers for their lockdowns and tiers not working, they say it's because people keep breaking the rules? Well, it's a bit politically illiterate to issue a new law or a diktat and expect 100% of all people to obey them. That's just not human. You have to factor in the fact that there will be people who will break the laws. So they cannot say the reason our policies are not working is because people break the rules, because that was always going to happen. And even that, my contention is that throughout this, the vast majority of people in this country have obeyed the rules, and quite rightly so. I think most people in this country are sensible and reasonable about this sort of thing. So you'll always have some who aren't. Again, my question is, they cannot say our policies haven't worked because people broke the rules. I would contend your policies just haven't worked.
So, I mean, I think you're right. The overwhelming proportion of people have obeyed the rules. And I was one of the scientists back in March that was saying any kind of lockdown was not sustainable for more than 4 to 6 weeks. And I think I would quite happily hold my hands up and say I was wrong about that. The way that people complied with the rules was overwhelming for a really long period of time. Mm-hmm. But we have to look at the first lockdown and the second lockdown in November. Now, we do know that there were some things that were different with the second lockdown. We know that students were still at universities. We know that children were still in school. And we do know that this new variant was starting to appear in the southeast. But looking at that, it's really clear that there was some differences with the second lockdown. It wasn't bringing the R number below 1 in the way that the first one was. So that then leaves us with a really difficult situation. What do you do? Do you tighten the restrictions to try to bring the R number below 1? But we know that's damaging. We know that has effect on people's well-being. And then you have to look at schools. And I think schools are a really political issue at the moment.
Yep.
I've always backed keeping schools open because it's very damaging for children's education to close them. But where else do you go if you want to bring the R number below 1?
Yes, I mean, that's the problem, isn't it? That nobody wants to see the schools closed, but there's no doubting that while kids don't necessarily get COVID very badly, they may be asymptomatic if they get it at all, they are associating with their parents. Their parents may be in contact with people with COVID, so the kids take it into school. They mix with their other kids. The other kids go home to their parents. This is a form of spreading the condition, isn't it? Spreading the virus.
Yeah, and of course, this is one of the challenges. Now, the difficulty, of course, we have with secondary school closures is what is that going to do to mixing? Are we going to see, teenagers going out mixing in other settings in places where it may not be as regulated as within schools? So I think this is where we need to be very careful. Now, my hope is that with this school closures, with this delay to the start of term that the government have announced, they use that time to really get mass testing rolled out. That could be, in the absence of a vaccine, hopefully that could enable children to go back to school safely and children to be isolated when they pick up infection if they can have weekly tests.
So let's try and end on an optimistic note, Michael. Can we put our faith in these two vaccines? Maybe more might come along, and the vaccine program is the vaccine program our way out of this dark state we've been in for the last 9 months?
Well, I'm all for ending on a positive note. So let's say, I think it was some great news yesterday that the Oxford vaccine was approved. The Oxford vaccine is a game changer because we have ordered more doses of the Oxford vaccine than the Pfizer one. It can be stored at a higher temperature, which means it's much easier to distribute. My hope is if the government can get behind this 1 million to 2 million doses a week that they have committed to being able to deliver, then my hope is that by the spring, we can start to see the worst effects of this virus dissipating.
Excellent, Michael. You better get that call. Thank you so much for your time. Dr. Michael Tildesley, the member of the Scientific Pandemic Influenza Group on modelling, SPIM for short. They advise the government on how to deal with this pandemic. Very interesting conversation that, I thought.